Well, greetings everyone. My name is Peter Costea. I am an attorney in Houston, Texas, and we are doing this conversation tonight in Europe. It's midday in the United States through the kindness of our friends, Voice of Christians. And for today's podcast, we have a very interesting topic to discuss and also a very interesting person to discuss the topic with, and that is Pastor Scott Hearn, and he's going to introduce himself at some point. Briefly, I welcome you to our podcast tonight, and I'm going to encourage you, as before, to go ahead and write comments, ask questions of me, especially ask questions of the guest, because we have a very important topic to discuss tonight. A couple of weeks ago, as I was going through the more or less conservative media in the United States, looking at different topics, I came to this very fascinating study. It's a fairly long study. The name of it is the Global Flourishing Study, the 2025 edition, which deals with a subject which is important to you and I. It deals with the subject of human flourishing, which is very important. All of us, all human beings on the planet or so, we all aim in the same direction to flourish, to develop, from all points of view, all dimensions of our existence, spiritual, material, intellectual, and so on and so forth. And so every 2 or 3 years or so, a couple of universities in the United States and then a whole bunch of scholars and volunteers and people across the globe put together this vast, massive, fascinating study about human flourishing, which nations are flourishing, what causes the flourishing of the human being, what are the impediments to us flourishing and reaching really the best of our potential, and so on and so forth. So I would encourage you to stay with us because it's a fascinating topic, and we are privileged to have for our guest tonight a person that's very closely associated with the study and with the process which eventually generated this amazing study. Scott, he's a pastor in San Antonio in Texas, and he's going to introduce himself as well and tell us more details about himself and his life. The study was put together by two prestigious universities in the United States. One is Harvard University, and then also Baylor University in the state of Texas. And Baylor is a private university, so is Harvard, and they have a lot in common. But anyway, we'll discuss the details and dissect the relationship through the presentation of our guest, Scott Hearn. Scott, welcome this evening, this noontime in Texas. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here. I feel grateful to be a part of the conversation. It's an important topic, and I'm looking forward to just kind of unfolding it with you and your guests.
Great, thank you very much. Could you please tell us a few things about yourself, what you do, your family? I know you mentioned to me that you're a pastor a short while ago. I like for the public to know a little bit more about you as a person, your intellectual pursuits, and things of that nature.
Sure. Thank you. Yes, I've been a pastor for 31 years, and that's been a unique experience for me. In some ways, it's been pretty common, local church pastor, that kind of thing, preaching every week, teaching, discipling, all of those kinds of things. But it's also included alternative opportunities, which were social entrepreneurship, rethinking the infrastructure of kingdom life, understanding how to reimagine property, rethink kind of theological and economic premises of church world life. Some international work, although limited. We lived in England, are close to some folks that are in Israel, actually right now, studied in Israel as well, and have led trips to Israel, study tours, and those kind of experiences for about 25 years. Planted churches, done all those things, and all along the way have been highly interested in different intellectual pursuits when it came to a really specific question. And this is how I got connected to the study as a whole, especially from my theological perspective. And that was, in the world right now, it seems quite clear to me that the present infrastructure of the kingdom will not hold the future structure of the church. that the way that we are going about it is in kind of that full-on turnover that happens about every 500 years. Doesn't touch the core elements of the faith, doesn't change scriptural understanding or any of those kinds of things, but the way in which that gets delivered to the world is in a real huge or very large complete turnover. Even the fact that we're having this conversation in the way that we're having this conversation wouldn't have been in our imaginations 10 years ago. Maybe farther. And so it's powerful to think about all of that. So I get to this place where I think, well, if that's true, if the present infrastructure won't hold the future structure, then where is the future infrastructure, and how do we begin to explore? How do we begin to put it in a laboratory to create? How do we hand a much better and more potential filled opportunity to our children? And so we have an incredible responsibility that actually comes with a lot of creativity right now in our time in the church. And so as a part of that, one of the things that happened is I ran into, like you, the human flourishing work. And what I saw in the human flourishing work was something that was mind-blowing to me. And here's why. What I saw was Harvard University, which I, as a pastor, had been concerned with for a while because of kind of progressive leanings and things like that. And so it was an institution of our nation that was proud of because of its intellectual capacity, but was concerned about its direction. I think worldwide that's been a concern. And what I was finding was that there were parts of Harvard, just like parts of everywhere else, that were extraordinary. And this was one of them. There was a gentleman named Tyler Vanderweel. And I essentially believe that this human flourishing work is some of the earliest discovery or the earliest pieces of the infrastructure that I've seen that could genuinely be new. Something that in some ways looks back and says, this basically is biblical abundant life. That's all it really is. It's nothing shocking. It's all it is. Except that what it is now is it's a progressive university like Harvard that is saying in data and in analytics, we can actually define it and we can measure it. And that changes the way that governments, educational facilities, medicine, about every single thing you can think of must then think about what their work is. And so that was really compelling for someone like me. So I turned toward Byron. We've grown a very powerful team to begin to create what's now the Institute for Global Human Flourishing at Baylor in partnership with Harvard. But Baylor is the present headquarters of the Global Flourishing Study.
I didn't know that. Baylor is the center of the Human Global Flourishing Study program. Amazing.
It is
Congratulations.
Amazing. You're familiar with Texas a little bit, as you mentioned earlier. So you remember Waco. And so there's a part of me that says, what good could come from Waco?
Yeah, what good can come out of Nazareth?
That's right.
Yeah, indeed. It's a fascinating place, and I recommend everyone that's visiting Texas, if you have an interest in history, the history of Texas, Baylor definitely is one of the establishments in Texas where you can get a lot of history. So go visit. Going back to the topic, and by the way, I appreciate and I congratulate you, Scott, for the work that you have done. In a sense, you and I are on the same page. It's very important for us to be forward-thinking and looking into the future. I am probably much older than you are, but I still look to the future and I see, and I try to figure out where is Christianity going to land or be 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now. How are we going to impact globally, impact society? And what fascinated me as well listening to you was this tremendous intersection that you discover between theology, essentially the Bible, and what actually came to mind when you were talking about that was the book of Proverbs and the principles for for life that we have find in the book of Proverbs, intersecting so powerfully, magnificently with one of the most, quote, liberal, progressive institutions in the education establishment in the United States and globally. So let's go back, and what I would like for you to do is to give us a little bit of history about the Human Flourishing Project. I have seen it for the last 10, 15 years, just reading the headlines in the conservative press in the United States about this project, and it's been around for a while. So give us some details, please, about the history and the origins of this endeavor.
I'd love to. Thank you. I think it goes back to about 2015. I've talked to Tyler. All of our relationships are actually quite tight. There are about 25 people that are at the core of all of this, and every one of us kind of functions like a family, which has been a very fascinating part of this. So I will probably refer to very esteemed colleagues like Dr. Tyler Vanderweel, who is an astonishing, brilliant, if he's not a genius, I'm not sure what genius is, kind of person, but I might just refer to him as Tyler. So if that happens, that's why. It's a part of the beauty of the study is that it's not only extraordinary, but it's actually fostering real human flourishing amongst the people that are involved. So that's been powerful. But I'll tell you the story of Tyler Vanderweel. Tyler Vanderweel essentially got to a place in his life, and he is theologically trained. He is he's trained at a level that is difficult to. I don't know what he does not know. And so part of the work that he began to do was to look around Harvard and think, well, if we're able to use this powerful engine around economics or philosophy or biology or whatever it is that they were thinking about, why can't we actually apply this to humanity in a unique way? Why can't we take the highest level of science and see what we might be able to discover? And the target, the hope that they had at the time was this idea to really get clear on an issue that I think pastors, mayors, governors, prime ministers worldwide, any kind of leader really is after, which is, I hope, as we know, not always true, but what is well-being? What is the goal? So for instance, I had a conversation with the mayor of San Antonio about a year and a half ago. And he and I were having breakfast over, and I said to him, well, what's the point of your work? And what is the point of the city government? What's the why? Why does it exist? Is it for economic benefit? Is it for, what's the point? And he had lots of things to say that were very, like you would imagine. And I said, well, what if it was just really simple? What if the why of every government, what if the why of every education, a teacher, what if the why was every human being flourishes? That's our why. That's where we're headed. That's the North Star. What if it was like that? And he said, well, then you would have to be able to define it and measure it. And I said, well, I've got good news. And so what happened is, it was that question. How do you define and measure well-being? How do you define and measure wholeness? And so most of the world had just been arguing about that. This is what I think it is, this is what I think it is, but it was all what's called correlative research, which I know you understand. And that is this kind of idea that all of the research it correlates with this. We know that if you do this, well, that it can be helpful for your life. Being around this kind of thing can benefit your health one way or the other. But they were never able to get what was called causal or causation on the research, which part of that reason is because you have to do a longitudinal research with very difficult formulas, the same people asking the same questions coming in a really consistent way. And so it's incredibly expensive, incredibly time consuming. No one was going to do it. And Tyler essentially said, well, if we could get to causation to define what well-being is, then it would be worth it. It would be worth all the money. It would even be worth failure. And so he did everything that he could, put together a great team, and they spent time and were actually able to get to causation to be able to define what well-being is. And the simplest form is that the person simply says that every aspect of their life is good. That's the simplest definition. And so part of it is to say that, I couldn't tell you, for instance, whether you're flourishing or not, just by reading something. Only you can really tell me if you're flourishing or not. And so it really is kind of that kind of self, and across, that breaks down and helps us understand cross culture, cross economic, everything else, one way or another. And so he was able to get to causation and define that. And in doing so, he actually got to there are 6 different domains. So that is the definition is that a human being says that every part of their life is good, and then deeper, when they got deep into this material, what they discovered is that every human being, initially they said 5 domains, and then they've added a 6th domain for the global flourishing study, which we can talk about. But the first 5, the ones that go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. We are going to go through those 5 or 6 because they are fascinating topics. What I would like to establish before we get there is you guys have invested a lot in this study. And from what I understand, this study does not pop up every year because it takes a lot of effort to create this study. It involves a lot of people. It involves a certain amount of countries. It involves questionnaires, a certain methodology and methods, and so on and so forth. Let's focus on that because I think I have read about 50 pages of the study. You know, the study can be found online, and it's very detailed. It's amazing. It's wonderful the way it was put together. And it dawned on me that a lot of work went into putting this formidable study. So can you please give us some statistical data about this study? How it came about, how many countries are covered? I've seen from what I have read about half the world's population directly, indirectly was involved in this tremendous study. How many years it took, how many researchers, maybe volunteers, how many subjects were interviewed for this fascinating study?
Sure, I will. And I'll tell you what happened was there was a key moment, and that is that once Dr. Vanderwell was able to get that causation, there was another person named Byron Johnson. He's from Baylor. And he came to Dr. Vanderwell and said, you can't say that you have human flourishing caused with only really one nation measured. It has to be a global. And that was the key. And I think that's when, I think you and I would agree, it got really fascinating. Because then what they did was they raised from the Templeton Foundation and some others, but primarily from the Templeton Foundation, just right at $43 million to do the study with over 22 nations. There were 22, and then they had to pull back to 20 because 2 of them were Ukraine and Russia. They studied those. They were able to get through 20 through the first and the second round. It was about 200 different professors globally, 200,000 different people that were interviewed in that same kind of causal way that I was telling you about through partnership with the Gallup, the whole Gallup organization and everything that comes with that. So the way that they do that is that they have simply sort of like iPads. I don't think they're actually iPads, but they look like that. They're handheld devices that are geo-located. And so they have the questions and the processes, and they can go in and say, this is that person. This is the location that they were in. They can be checked for the person that is actually doing the interview. Were they in that location? Like they do a ton of layering to make sure that they're getting the most accurate ongoing information that they possibly can get. They've gone through the first wave 1. They've gone through wave 2. And they're into wave 3 now. And one of the exciting pieces of wave 3 is that you mentioned that they were at about a 50%, about half of the world's population. But when they added China, which I know that you know that as well, when they added China, it went up to, I want to say like 62 or 63% of the population just for the size of the nation alone. They really do hope to expand, and there have been nations that have been asking to be a part, and they're walking through how to do that to get to up to what the World Poll has often done, which is close to 98%. That's the dream. That's the hope.
Amazing, folks. 22 countries, about 63% of the world's population covered by this study. Hundreds of researchers, volunteers, 200,000 respondents. How many years did it take to put together this study?
Oh, the study probably was put together since 2015, probably 17. So 3 or 4 years to get the study just going, fundraising 2 or 3. And then the actual work of the study has been in the last 3-4 years.
Imagine that, folks. So listen up. You're going to get into the substance of this study. As you can imagine, this study is legitimate. It's not being put together by adventurers, but by serious people, competent people, sociologists, people with an interest in economics, politicians, maybe political science, pastors, clergy, maybe people with expertise in the area. So you mentioned a while ago 5 or 6 principles or topics or areas which tend to indicate whether or not somebody's life is good or whether or not somebody's life is flourishing. So let's get into those 5 or 6 topics and please explain those to us.
Sure. When they did the overall work of saying that this is what flourishing is, what they discovered then in the work was that there were initially five topics, or what they called domains, that rose up in the data to say that ultimately these 5 domains must exist. A human being has to have access to these in order to live the full and free life that we're created to live. And then during the global flourishing, they added the 6th because they discovered in the initial that 6th really was close enough to the other 5 that it needed to be added in. It wasn't sort of a core, but it was necessary for the rest. So the 5 are happiness and life satisfaction, physical and mental health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, close social relationships, and then the added 6th is financial and material stability. So I think you could see without financial and material stability, it's very difficult for any of the others to be realized.
Yeah, very important. And I think that you have touched just about every aspect of our lives. But I want to ask you about another one, which is coming up in the study quite frequently. And if you can focalize or focus on it for the next 5-10 minutes or so, the spiritual dimension. I have seen, and probably that's Baylor. That's probably your input. Maybe it's Dr. Johnson's input. I do not know. But I have seen the study over and over again emphasis on spirituality, on faith as an important dimension to attain, to flourish for a human being. Can you comment on that, please?
I can. In fact, it's very exciting research for someone like me, and probably for many of your listeners. But I have to begin by saying that the study is not Christ-centered. It is not religiously centered.
That's right.
It is actually important to say that it is fully secular study, and the researchers that are involved are deeply diverse. There are some that are faithful, some that are faithful in different religions, and then many that are kind of pure scientists and don't find faith outside of their own research. And so I think that's an incredibly important part of it, is just to say that this isn't sort of a church study. In fact, it's probably a preeminent study scientifically just on humanity. And so the reason I say that is because one of the things that does come up and has come up regularly is that the faith element is surfacing, and spirituality is surfacing as an extraordinarily important part of being a human being and having the capacity to flourish. And so some people have thought, oh, well, this is a study that's been put together in a way, and the answer to that question is no. In fact, that's one of the places that the researchers, even those that are faithful, push back very hard and want you to see exactly how they've put this together. In fact, all of this data is not kept neither in Baylor or Harvard. It's kept at the Center for Open Sciences, which means that it's democratized. Anybody worldwide, globally, that's listening here that has accreditation and can go onto the Center for Open Science, put in your credentials, and tell them what you want to use the data for, can get access to that work. It's an incredible thing. I say all of that to say, amongst a very secular, beautifully put together, incredibly expensive and detailed research, faith has surfaced with some incredible power. In fact, there are some things that are just very clear. One of them that I think is really quite fascinating is that there's an extremely intense this one is they have not gotten to causation on this because they've only in the 3rd here, but they are so close. They don't like to say causation, so they'll say correlative on this piece. But knowing how this research goes, if we're just one more year away, that's when that flips over into causation. They just want to be really careful with it. But there are those correlative pieces that are starting to say that if you attend a worship service, if you attend church, or if you attend any faith body, but church is specifically included, if you attend any faith community once a week, your flourishing score has a much greater chance of being higher than anyone else. What was really powerful is that if you look directly and you dig a little bit deep into the Christian scores and you see worldwide, what's powerful about that is it didn't seem to matter whether it was evangelical or if it was Baptist or if it was Orthodox or Catholic or whatever it may be. And initially, to be honest, if you're a faithful person and you lead in a particular version of all of this, you kind of think quietly. You don't tell anybody, but you think, oh, ours is better. But what's true about it is that basically, if Jesus is in the room, your flourishing score will be higher, regardless of the version of that's true. We can work out the details after that, but it's such a powerful thing. Dr. Vanderwell is really one of the things that's fun to hear him say is to talk about how much time attending church once a week adds to your life. I don't know if you saw that statistic, but the statistic says that it adds up to 10 years to your life. And I think, can you imagine if you were able to say, here's this prescription, here's this diet, here's this exercise that will add 10 years of your life because you're flourishing, and people wouldn't be running to take part in all of that. So the church comes out incredibly powerfully. In fact, I'll say another thing about it. One of the things that's powerful about the domains is that having access to those domains is really the most important part. And we found that there are 4 pathways that give us access to those domains. You won't be surprised by them, but the first is family. If you have access through your family to those domains, then you have a wonderful chance to flourish. As an aside, there's some statistics that are suggesting that attending church or a faith community actually can have as much, if not more, impact on your life and your flourishing than your family of origin, which is wild. But so family is one. Another is work. Your work provides a pathway to that. The third is education, school. But the fourth, equal to those, is your faith community. And so it's not just sort of the spirituality, because the spirituality is sort of one step deeper. The data piece is the attendance. So what is happening that makes things different? How are people adjusting their life? What's their ritual weekly? How do these things work out? And we find that attending church, being a part of that community, is having a profound impact. And for the record, countries that have very low or even hostile pushback against the church, the flourishing scores for those that attend are even higher. It has a deeper impact in those countries than in countries maybe even like myself in the southern part of the United States, where the church is still relatively revered. So the dynamic numbers that come up with spirituality and faith community have been really exciting for me, because of the research and the data that's come out for so long about the church, where it is and mostly where it's not. To have so much powerful data come out that is encouraging of the kingdom is a big deal.
Yeah, I have commented frequently along the years, and I have seen those studies in the United States and elsewhere. They come out of, even out of European countries, which emphasize very much that faith has a very important bearing on how happy a person is. And what I liked about the study, and again, you can find it online, and I would like to ask our technician tonight to put the link to the study in the comment section of the podcast. What I liked about the study is that there is indication that the study covers people from just about all faith around the globe. It's not only Christians, it's not Christians from various denominations, but it's also Islam, Muslim, Chinese, no faith, Japan is included in the study, and of course they have a different faith, Buddhism, Shintoism, and so on and so forth. Judaism as well. So you will see there about 20, 25 uh, denominations and faith identities listed for the people that participate in this study. So it's a global, universal conclusion. The study doesn't say causation; it talks about correlation. But I think for us, people of faith, we do know that faith certainly adds is an ingredient. It's a product. It's something. It's like a fertilizer which causes
Mm.
us to grow and flourish. So there is so much talk about this study, but what comes to mind now is, and I know that a lot of people can identify with this topic and this question, the topic of adversity in childhood.
Mm.
For some of us, I've been, probably you have been subjected to adversity in your early years. I have, having lived in a communist state, which was not a joke, it was not a walk in the park. But that adversity in the days of my youth have changed me for the good, for the better. But I
Hmm.
have seen in the study that you're tackling this topic, adversity in childhood, and how that can be an influence towards flourishing, or it can be an inhibiting factor. So, what can you tell us about that? And in general, childhood experiences.
Sure. There's, for the most part, it's almost what you would expect. And that's a part of, I think, really great research, is that you intuitively say, that makes sense to me. And that happens often. Sometimes we get very excited about research that tells us something completely off from what we were expecting. And then we find out a few years later, well, there was a reason that was sort of where it was. But childhood adversity is, as you might imagine, a very difficult piece, and affects human flourishing in particular at that age, but can over time continue to kind of cycle and create all kinds of trauma that resurfaces over a lifetime, and keep it there. Then there are certain pinpoints and moments, including, as I mentioned earlier, church involvement and an educator or work that all of a sudden allows for a time or an experience where those domains get exposed to a kid, and then they can rise up again. It's one of the things that we're actually working on here, is to begin to create laboratories, human laboratories, to say, okay, if we have an experience where a child has adversity, we want to go into an area that there's poverty, we want to go into an area where we know that there's a lot of domestic abuse. What kinds of things would the people in those places say about their human flourishing? Let's measure that. Then let's bring in the activations. Now, the activations might be all kinds of different nonprofits, government, kind of things like that, to try to help mitigate the issues that these kids are going to have or going to need to work through over time. But one of the things that we're able to do with the measure is to be able to let them tell us what the issues are, because sometimes on our side of the fence, we assume what those issues are and we don't know. And so being able to see, which is what this really does give us, is the vision to be able to be clear about those issues, and then to bring activations in and see if those activations actually work. I mean, the problem I think that governments and churches and nonprofits often have is they pour a ton of energy, a ton of story, and a ton of all kinds of resources, including financially, and they're not really sure that it worked in a deep enough way to say that this is an effective thing that we need to keep doing. And it's just because we haven't been able to measure it. And so until now. So one of the things when I think about adversity with children is I don't know that the study, I could think of one little strange offing. And it has to do with faith too, interestingly, when it comes to adversity. And we don't really know what it means, but it looks like children that are 12 or 13, I believe, that are involved in a faith life actually have a higher suffering score. Now, my kids really liked that. That was really funny to them. They thought, well, that's because they've been forced to go to church every week their whole life. And so we had a fun dinner time over that. But there's a lot of theories about what that might mean. One is an obvious one that folks that dislike church would say, and that would be, that's because there's toxic environments, and there definitely are, and that should be rooted out. And that should be discovered and known. Another might be that they are exposed to the idea of suffering, not in an invaluable way. but in this is a part of life, and this is something that we overcome. And this is what, in our case as Christians, Christ overcame. And so there's this picture of all of that. But I think that when it comes to the childhood adversity pictures that we've been in recent conversation about, most of that work has been on how do we actually begin to mitigate those issues and measure with measured, consistent measurability and engagements that are actually doing the work. And that's where I do most of my work. Most of my work at Baylor is with market engagement, meeting with and engaging all the different sectors, but also creating what we're calling an innovation lab and bringing all of this research and all of the resources to bear on the world's most difficult issues.
I have also seen, to my satisfaction, and probably you have experienced this in your life. I have in my life, certainly, and I'm sure that millions and millions of people have experienced the same feelings. If you give, if you are charitable, if you volunteer to do work, that certainly adds to your worth as a person and helps in terms of flourishing as a human being. I've seen that emphasized in the study. Was it like a general finding throughout the study or throughout the world?
Yes, it is a general picked up number that makes clear sense on volunteering, but it does seem to come back, as you, I think, stated well, some sort of giving yourself away, some sort of doing something for or about not you. You know, it doesn't even matter what that might be. It has a positive impact on your flourishing score. And so it, in some ways, is counter to sort of the culture, especially of the United States in some ways, which is sort of a receive, a kind of a take, and a self-centered kind of culture many times. And so to be able to say, actually, you're not going to be satisfied, to have data to tell you that you won't be satisfied by being the center of your, even your own world, but you'll only be able to fully realize who you are by thinking and doing for others, is an extraordinary thing to see in the data, the way that it's coming out.
It's fascinating because, of course, in the Christian tradition, we have this fascinating and formidable formula: it's better to give than to receive. You give of yourself, you give of what you have, and you also receive maybe not finances or material things that you give to others, but you receive a great deal of satisfaction. That's why it's important, I think, for us as adults to foster a culture of giving everywhere, in our churches, in our communities, in our families, because it is a key to happiness and flourishing. Folks, I encourage you to read this study. Go find it online, discuss it in your social settings. Journalists pick it up, discuss it in the media. Pastors, priests, leaders, read it. It's a formidable study. Again, it's not a theological study, like Scott put it very, very well. It's a, quote, secular document put together by sociologists, experts, psychologists, and so on and so forth. And it's very important. You can spread a lot of good teachings from that document, extract important principles from that document, and pass it on in your blogs, in your discussions, your podcasts, and so on and so forth. There is so much that we can talk about this study. I want to touch 2 or 3 more points. One of them, and I want to make this comment because I would like to focus on the young generation to give them hope and courage, because I've seen in the study repeated 4 or 5 times that up to about 48, 49, up to the age of 50 or so, people have a hard time not actually flourishing, but realizing that you're flourishing. Then all of a sudden, after a certain age, people realize, I have reached a point where I'm happier, where I am more content with myself, with whatever I've got in the bank, with whatever the relationships I have, the church I attend, and so on and so forth. And so We've seen, I think, results from Poland, I think, and Tanzania concerning the fact that in general, the younger generation tends to be more depressed when it
Mhm.
comes to the human flourishing aspect of life. Am I accurate in my perception of the study? And if so, tell us what's going on, please.
You are accurate. And one of the things that is interesting about that is that studies for a long time, essentially the flourishing or the happiness or whatever score they were looking at was shaped more like a U. And so over time, your life would start and you were young and you would, of course, say, I'm flourishing. I'm having a great time. I'm at home. I don't pay my bills. I'm watching movies. I'm going to school. I'm like,
Precisely.
that's right. How could life be bad? This is great. And so for decades and generations, there was a real rich, this is my childhood acknowledgement, and everything that came with that. Um, and so it would shape like a U. Then you would go into, you become an adult and you get to work and things aren't easy and the life can be hard and things happen. And so it goes down. And this is the traditional shape. And then as you age, you're like, you know what? I'm at the place now where I know who I am. I'm comfortable with what I've got, and it's really my priorities have changed in a way that allow me to be something more. And that was sort of the general term. Or what we found was something different, and it was disturbing. It was uncomfortable, and that is that there has been a shift, and instead of being a U shape, it's more about going from the bottom left to the top right. It's actually kids seem to be really struggling, and in some ways, we can all start to speculate what those things might be, but there's been a deep shift somewhere, and there are people right now that are, as you might imagine, just going really deep into these numbers to try to figure out at what point. My mom used to say she sewed, and so she would talk about a misstitch. If when you were stitching along, you had a misstitch, you had to go all the way back to that misstitch to find out what the issue was. And yeah, you got to undo the whole thing to get back to here. And so I think that there's a lot of folks trying to find out where that misstitch is. Where do we lose the kids? And like you suggested, is this real or perceived? Is it that there's not an appreciation, or is it that there really is an oppression of some kind in the world? And we can, the obvious things are like social media, all kinds of shifts that are coming with the digital world. I don't know that our brains are all meant to know all of the tragedy that we know about every day just by watching the news. I just don't know that we're supposed to know. There's a part of me that thinks we should know so that we can functionally work on those things. But a part of me knows that my brain actually is not created to consume all of that at the same time. And if I was 10 or 11 or 12 years old, I'm not sure how I would handle that. And so that's one of the things that when we found that got picked up by a lot of the press. And so people are running around and trying to figure out, well, if this is true and it's coming back in a regular rhythm across the study, and it's a great example. So what do we do about that? So we'll start trying to do something about that. Well, are those things working? Well, we'll know because we're going to measure that and we'll tell you if they're working or not. And if they're not, then we need to change what we're doing and do something else. And that's a really new piece of this, is to be able to say what we're trying is working or it's not. People used to say it's like bowling in the dark with some of this stuff. You just throw that ball as hard as you can. It makes a big noise and you hope you can tell a really good story, but you have no real idea what the score is. And, what Flourishing score does is it turns the lights on. We can actually see what's happening, and something as important as our youth and a shift culturally like that can be seen generally globally is a big deal to discover.
I'm telling you, Scott, the book of Proverbs works. And so, young people, we love you. I know that Scott has kids; he loves them. I love very much the younger generation. And remember these 4 or 5 principles that Scott mentioned early in the podcast. Family is important to human flourishing. Faith and attachment to a faith, and going to a place of worship at least once a week. And I would dare say also having a relationship with with God, praying and so on and so forth. Finances are important, and they come with age, and finances are tied to work, which Scott also mentioned. Employment is very important to develop as a person, to develop your psychological well-being, your mental health being occupied, being not preoccupied, not worried, but being occupied, having a permanent purpose for your life, for getting up in the morning, getting out the door, getting into your car, or walking down the street to your place of employment. And also very much education, like Scott said, according to a study. Family, faith, education, employment are very, very important. Scott,
That's right.
I want us briefly to talk about ladies, because ladies do come up in the study quite a bit, and I was surprised to see that in general, listen up, guys. In general, ladies tend to be happier or more content to, flourish more than men or so. And
Mhm.
was my reading of the study accurate in this regard, Scott? What's your take on this?
Well, I wish that this one was not true, but it is. You know,
It's
I
funny.
was yeah. Well, it would be great if we had won that one, but we didn't.
We
Yeah,
men
it
didn't.
is.
We lost
It is.
out on this one.
I know. And there's lots of different reasons that people are, again, because the stuff is so new and so cutting edge, that what happens is we have a discovery like that. So, oh, women are doing better than men and flourishing. Well, why is that? Well, do they, and I'm like, do they have a lower threshold, or do they have, are their expectations different, or are they more capable, more connected, more in tune with themselves and the world that is around them? Like, we don't really know completely. There's early kind of conversations about what that might look like, but it's definitely a number that I think is fascinating to think about. The other thing that could be is it's not necessarily that women are flourishing quite as much or much more. It may be that we're struggling. It may be that men worldwide are grinding a little harder than maybe we have or should, or we're in a situation, and we all are, where things are changing at such a dynamic space that where we used to be able to say confidently as men, I know this, I know how this works, that's not true anymore. And so there's some interesting cultural dynamics that come with that. There's some interesting kind of transformational dynamics as far as history and time. And then, when my wife just basically says, well, we win, I, I don't know what to do with that. I will say, you mentioned earlier, kind of thinking about how really some of what we're talking about really goes backwards. It's almost like these old classic morals, these old really deep things like are in Proverbs. Like, literally, these ancient truths are surfacing as data points for flourishing human beings, which is super fascinating. There's a new pilot, which you probably didn't know about, that would be interesting interesting for you. It's Flourishing in the Church. It's a brand new pilot that's been funded, and so we're working on that. What the professor in charge of that, her name, and since she's a she, I assume she's flourishing more than I am. But she and I are working together. Her name is Dr. Kate Long. Brilliant. But what she says is, she said, I want to write an article called "The Banality of Flourishing." And so what I told her was, I said, well, first off, you can't call it the banality of flourishing, because I had to look up a banality and find out that it was boring. So, and what she means by that is that the truth is, all of this work is exactly what your grandmother or your grandfather told you. It is going to be hard work. You are going to have a family in that you invest in. You are going, all of the things that are a profound piece of what we know to be consistently true over human history, to no surprise to many, surprise to some. These are surfacing up in the data, and they are worldwide, cross-cultural, cross-faith, and in every way surfacing to be kind of just putting a spotlight on that piece of who we are as human beings.
Amazing, folks. Again, I encourage you over and over again, go online, find this study, the name of the organization that actually has it, and you can access by registering. You can actually access the executive summary and a whole bunch of other details about the study online, just like I did. But if you want more access to additional data, in-depth analysis, you have to from what I understand, register with the Open Science. I forgot the name of the establishment. Scott, what's the name of the
Yeah, it's
establishment?
the
Open
Center for
Society,
Open Science.
Science, Open Science. You will find it. I easily found it online where you can register and obtain a great deal of data about this fascinating study. Scott, we are not done yet unless you tell me that you got an emergency. We want to thank you very much for sticking with us, sticking around for almost an hour. There are so many other topics that we could talk about concerning this study. One of them that drew my attention is what I call an anomaly, an oddity.
Hmm.
People in the developing world, they have this notion that everybody in the developed world is happy and flourishing. They've got the money, they've got the health care, they've got the education. Maybe they don't have as much family life as we do in the developing states, but golly, life in, you know, developed states must be heaven on earth. Everybody's happy, flourishing, so on and so forth. And lo and behold, your study says, whoops, it's not quite like that. Did I
No.
get the study right in this regard?
Once again, unfortunately, yes. It's very clear. As an American, it's when a bunch of Americans are discovering that we have issues again. That's not great, but it is true. What we found was the expectation, just exactly as you laid out, would be that it's these great, shining, developed nations with all this money, resource, power, and ability that would surely have the people that were flourishing and everything that would come with it. And while that is true, the expression is real, it's not actually that we are at the top. In fact, it is a kind of middle developing countries, not the ones that are really struggling. Countries that are on the deepest and most difficult. Of course, there's not going to be flourishing, but it's not going to be the United States. We're in the middle, maybe. It's going to be the top rated of the 22 we did was Indonesia. Indonesia was absolutely the top nation. And that was really fascinating. And so we're deep diving into what are you doing, Indonesia, to figure out kind of how their world has done so well. And it's exactly as you said, the countries that were they're not the top, but they're not the bottom. They're sort of in the middle and doing their best. Maybe some European nations, maybe some African nations, Latin American nations that people don't pay attention to very much, but have a general stability and opportunity. Well, they still have that deep family root. They still have those community life experiences. They still have culture that comes up in rhythms and rituals. There are all these things that are there that sometimes when you're able to literally wipe the slate clean and imagine yourself as king of the universe because you have all the power in the universe, all the power that you've ever imagined, you lose so much by not depending on each other is one of the theories that is coming around. And we're wondering about. But yeah, it's the middle developing countries that seem to be doing the best.
It's fascinating that you mentioned Indonesia because obviously if I'm not mistaken, it's the largest Muslim nation in the world,
That's
and
right.
we typically associate Islamic societies with unhappy women, and we talked about women, so on and so forth. And it sort of surprised me to find that the most flourishing nation in the world is not one that we can label as a Christian nation, but a nation
Mm-hmm.
that is rooted in Islam, where
Mm-hmm.
traditionally here in the West, in the Christian world, we associate life in Islamic countries with oppression for women and so on and so forth. Interesting findings. At the other
Truly.
end of the spectrum, I noticed that Japan didn't do quite well. A highly developed
No.
nation, they've got money,
Right.
they've got a national health service that's quite functional, they've got retirement benefits and so on and so forth. A highly developed, they've got work, they've got education, research, so on and so forth. But Japan is not doing that well in the ranking of flourishing countries as far as the population is concerned. What's going on there? What's wrong? What's going on in Japan?
So, of course, it would be dangerous for me to say, here's what's going on in Japan. But I understand what you're asking. What are we wondering about, or what are we seeing a little bit? And so it's a combination of things is what it looks like. And a lot of it has to do with kind of a loneliness. One of the interesting demographics that is not a part of our study, but is a part of the larger world's work, is that I believe Japan, if not number one, is in the top three of suicides. It is a very difficult space for some series of reasons to be. So that number is really captivating to begin to think about. Another number that will attract your attention is the population decline severity. So if you have a population decline there, Japan's really in trouble, close to going off a cliff. And I know I don't know about Romania. I know about other countries struggling with different population issues, but Japan, this is one of their big ones. In fact, there are some terribly sad stories about what seems to be happening is that the young people, because of the population decline, are really, as you might imagine, they're coming together in cities, which means that they're generally abandoning a lot of the kind of country that, for me, the picturesque things that are on my walls about Japan and just gorgeous kind of country life. And in doing so, tend to be leaving the older people out in the country. One of the articles that you can find, not in our material, but in other places, is there's even a kind of an interesting phenomenon happening where in some of these places they're creating mannequins. I'm not sure, is that's yeah, they're like mannequins or
Yeah,
large
right.
dolls, and they set them into public places and park benches so that when people are out, they have someone to sit next to. And you can see the pictures of this. I don't know how like how much that's happening, but it is happening, and it has come to our attention, been in part of our conversations, is what these kind of, it's like a constellation you can't quite name with Japan. Because they do score so well in some of the other pieces, as you suggested, that you think, okay, now, well, what do we need to do about these lower pieces, the struggling parts of Japan, and will it work? How will we know? And can we do it fast enough to actually get that to turn? And so, yeah, Japan's a very fast. would not have expected Japan to be at the bottom of our list.
Yeah, Japan concerns me as well. I have read about Japan over a number of years, the population decline, the aging population, and South Korea, which I'm looking at the tables right now, is not part of the
That's
study,
right.
but South Korea is in a similar situation from a demographic point of view. So, and also Japan, family life in Japan, from what I understand, in the last 20, 30 years has declined. A lot of young people do not want to marry, they do not want to have children. They are
Right.
focusing on careers, not on
Hmm.
family, not that much on human to human relationships. And so you have this unfortunate score for Japan. I also want to mention a number of countries that are doing fairly well in comparison to the wealthy countries in the world. Argentina, Brazil, Mexico also did fairly well in this study. And those of you who watch from Europe, from Romania, by the way, Romania is not included in this study. I think that Germany is, some of the Scandinavian states. And one of the
Hmm.
beautiful things about this study, again, Scott, is that the study covers 22 countries, six
Hmm.
continents, and a
Hmm.
variety of levels of development, faith, traditions, religions, and so on and so forth. So it's a very useful, well put together study. Approaching the end of our conversation, Scott, I want to focus on, if you will, please list for us in terms of knowing what to do not to um, stunt human flourishing. Can you tell us what we need to do to prevent human flourishing. That's been part of the study as well. And if you could, child abuse was one of them, for instance, and some other items as well. So, what recommendations or what aspects of human life is societal life is the study focusing on, which sort of indirectly is telling us do not do these things and they will not prevent human because they will prevent human flourishing.
Yeah. You bring up, a key one. Anything that has to do with childhood suffering is an overwhelming and often truly overwhelming piece to try to come through. What I will say is that there are some classics that are in the study, including child abuse, that really do show us things that you should not do. But I'll also say that one of the things that might be more helpful for each person is to do what some of us have started to do in our local areas. And so what you can actually do through demographics, so is through your city or through your nation, is to find out what are the top 3 issues that your nation or your city actually are dealing with. And the reason I say that is because, for instance, where I live in San Antonio, Texas, diabetes is a huge issue for a lot of reasons. Domestic abuse is a huge issue. And so and homelessness is lower, but it's still a large issue for our city. So one of the things that we can do is we can start to think about these really big global issues, and those are really helpful. But what I'm finding is it's sort of like wherever you're placed is wherever you're called. And so if you can get really clear on the issues that are right in front of you, that often can be the fastest key to understanding the cultural brokenness that's around you, and then to actually begin to use this work to engage that, to say, here are these measures. And clearly, for us, domestic abuse, family violence, well, where does that come from? Well, let's ask questions of these families. Do I want to go in and physically stop someone from beating their family? Yeah, I do. I think you kind of have that visceral reaction. But to actually discover often these generational things, decipher what's actually going on, bring meaningful activations around that so that you can not just get a program, but a culture change over time, that usually is going to give you the kind of effect I think that you're looking for. Because I can tell, your heart is tender to that. Is how do we actually, and you've seen that personally yourself. So, what kinds of things actually worked, when you were having to move through that difficult, toxic time, and your family was suffering and everything that came with it. What worked, what didn't work, how do we know? And those kinds of things are really, I think, what we're increasingly keying in on is trying to equip people right where they are to affect the issues that are around them.
And one final point concerning, factors that impact human flourishing that I have seen in the studies, some comments about the political establishment, whether or not you are able to vote, whether or not you can run for office. A lot of people feel frustrated. They are not feeling that they are flourishing because they cannot either vote, they cannot run for office. Of course, all of us after elections, we are either happy or we are absolutely disappointed. That's part of life. That's normal. But a lot of people in your study, I have seen, tended to be unhappy, either unhappy or happy. Unhappy because they cannot participate in the political process, in the democratic process, or happy because they can actually run for office. They can have a voice in their neighborhoods, in the political process. They vote every 2 years or so, every 4 years, whatever. And they derive satisfaction from that, knowing that they, in a sense, decide the fate of the society, the kind of society that they would like to have. Any comments on that?
I do. I will. The ability for a human being to have agency is what we find in a really consistent way throughout the whole process. And so if someone has the agency of a vote that they know will count, even if they get beat, that's fine. They just want to know that their vote counted for their leader that they were asking for. Even if they know they're going to get trounced in an election. They're going to march there. They're going to punch that ticket. They're going to put it in the deal because they're speaking. And so human beings have a deep need for agency. So it's not winning or losing all the time as much as it is knowing that your voice is heard, that what is happening is real, and kind of the things that come with that. And then, of course, nobody likes to lose. It's like you and me not liking losing to the women, but that just happens.
There you go. Yeah, I understand. Well, Scott, we thank you very much. Folks, we have had a wonderful, amazing conversation today. We are not done yet. In my opinion, Scott, I think that if we look at this study now from a Christian perspective, as I was reading the study, what came to mind was this study shows that we are all fallen. We have all fallen short. But there is a way to repair the past. There is a way to still flourish if we abide by these 5, 6 fundamental principles that the study recommends: family, finances, work, employment, close relationships, giving of yourself to others, and a whole bunch of other useful data. Again, it's the book of, in my Christian tradition, it's the book of Proverbs, which tells you what to do to flourish. And the book of Proverbs will also tell you what not to do to prevent flourishing in your personal life. Scott was kind enough to recommend, and I would like to ask him to recommend maybe 2 books, 1 or 2 or 3 books, for those who are interested in reading more about this study. And then, Scott, if you have any closing comments, maybe I have missed an item in the study that's important for our public, for the public to know, for our viewers, please let us know.
Well, first off, thank you for having me. It's been a real privilege, and I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I'm excited for the work that you do and for your listeners. I'm happy to engage any of this with any of you or them as we go. The books that I would recommend, the first would be a really brilliant commentary. Well, it's a kind of a combination of things where it's The Theology of Health by Tyler Vanderweel. And the reason that I'll kind of recommend that one is that it does have a theological underpinning, but it also has a practical application. And so what it actually is about is a person's whole health, but it includes the spiritual element. And so he's able to integrate the entirety of the domains in his work. And you can see, because he is the leader, the original researcher, the person that really drew all this out. I think that you get like that early feel for what this really is. And then I'll kind of go all the way to the newest book, which is a brand new book that's just been released. I think it's at Oxford. And I mean, it was released this week, and it's called Leadership for Flourishing. And this is a book that's just brilliant. It's been put together in such a way that it talks about how a leader has to be flourishing in order to bring flourishing to what they do. And so that's an overly simplified version of it, but it shows how the research, how the work, and how we can really become a very different kind of organization, a different kind of country, a different kind of world through leadership, and how that can work through flourishing. And so these are really beautiful and brilliant books. And again, they're on kind of the bookends of the one very early, and this one just brand new. And so I'd encourage all those. If you want to, you can also go through all of the deep work, which I know that you did too. There are profound books all over the place that you can find in this early stuff from Flourishing. So people like Dr. Matt Lee, Dr. Tyler Vanderweel, Dr. Kate Long, and Dr. Byron Johnson, who I'll just add is the primary leader of the global flourishing work. And there is an early documentary where flourishing has been integrated in an organization. Actually, it is in a maximum security prison in Mississippi with the men on death row. And they have integrated human flourishing into the last months of their life. And it is a documentary that tells that story, and it is profound. And so some of the early application of this is really extraordinary. And so I suppose the last thing I would say is, because of the breakthroughs that have happened in causation to be able to define and measure human flourishing, it means that we're on the threshold of a new understanding and a historic moment in human history. And I know that sounds like a big thing to say, but this has been proven out in about every conference, conversation. Byron will be at the UN next week. That it's just been, there's even I'll give you all the notice that there is, I think next month, the German church, the Lutheran German church, will be meeting in Austria, and their focus is on flourishing. They see that there might be in Europe the ability for flourishing to become a common place where people can come around the table. They don't have to be religious, and you can all of a sudden sit around a table and say, well, we all are for the flourishing of humanity. Well, of course we are. Well, here's what we bring to the table. Oh, here's what the government brings to the table. And so my encouragement would be to say, get to know the basics of this, let it become a language that turns into a Rosetta Stone, and then allow for all of the work to rise up in such a way that it becomes a North Star, and it can truly become the kind of thing that draws humanity together toward the potential for every human being to flourish in the world. And that's our commitment. And I would really just encourage every listener that would even lean that direction to join us.
Scott, we thank you very much. You've got my email address. If you have like a newsletter, or maybe the university, or maybe this project, Global Flourishing Study, whatever, if there is a newsletter that's available to the public, please send me the link, and I will post it on my Facebook page, along with those two books that you have recommended, and maybe possibly others that you want to email to me. I also want to recommend a book. It's my habit, more or less, just about any time I have a podcast, to recommend a book to those who listen or view the podcast. And it's a book that was published in June or July of this year. The title of the book is, if you don't mind, my colleagues, yes, in the technical side, The Immortal Mind, a fascinating book by a neurosurgeon. The title of the book is The Immortal Mind. The subtitle is A Neurosurgeon's Case for the Existence of the Soul. I started reading this book. I have not finished reading the book. It promises to be an extraordinary book, and it's not big, about 200 and something pages. Those of you who want to see the intersection of science and faith, like to some extent we have done that tonight on this podcast about the mind and the soul, I recommend that you do so. Scott, I want to thank you again very much for being with us here. I know it's a long weekend in the United States, Memorial Day weekend, and lo and behold, on Friday afternoon, you spend your time with the public in Europe, instructing us on this formidable study that you folks have put together. Before I forget, when is the next Flourishing study coming up, or do you have any idea?
They generally come out at the beginning of the year. This one should include some of the Chinese statistics, and could be very exciting. I see that we've got the Global Flourishing Study up on the screen, and you can also put that Global Flourishing Study, I think it's .org or .com, and you can find all of the latest information. That's one of the best spots to do that. But that will come out. I know that they're reading it now. All of the folks that the deep research, they go into little rooms and they just really go deep on the data. They're doing that right now, and usually it comes out toward the beginning of the year. The dream would be that we would do this every year in perpetuity, and maybe even time a national flourishing score about a month before the State of the Union from the United States, as a way of making that inform our governmental process. And so that's the kind of thing that could also be a potential globally, is that every nation could have their own flourishing score and hold that up to the situation that the government finds itself as a kind of a truth marker. And so there are lots of exciting things kind of coming.
Thank you very much, Scott. Good luck to you, and my heartfelt thanks, appreciation. Good luck to you and your colleagues at Baylor University, Dr. Johnson, and the people at Harvard. In closing, I also want to thank those who have watched this program and will be watching it in the next couple of days or so. And I also want to thank very much Julia Preutesa in Brussels, who helped me with some research on this topic. Thank you very much, Scott, and enjoy the long weekend in the United States.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.